All right, welcome to the first official episode of the Bob World Builder podcast, name pending. I'm here with Grace.
Hi, welcome.
And we're going to talk about spending gold in RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. So this topic was suggested by one of our patrons, Joe, as well as several commenters on YouTube a little while back. So we've got a list of ideas here, but we're going to begin with our own history with this issue from a player and DM perspective. So to begin, as a player in my first campaign, some of you guys might have seen my video where I kind of recap that with the DM and three of the other players in that campaign. It was very overpowered high fantasy stuff, and we had tons of gold, like tens of thousands of gold pieces each, I feel like, because one of the notable things that did come up in that video was that my character was able to purchase we all had crazy items and mounts, but one of the cool things of that game was an NPC who was this mysterious witch who sold enchanted body parts. And so I had legs that we just called them tiger legs. I don't know exactly what they looked like, I guess, but they were like weapons and allowed me to jump pretty high and I think move a little faster, and they cost at least 10,000 gold. It was insane. And on top of that, we all had giant flying mounts, probably by level 12. So we were just able to fast travel around, and our mounts were very competent in combat as well. So we pretty much used our gold to just spend it on ridiculous things that were fitting for the setting in a way. So it wasn't too much of a problem there, but I guess we did still have more than we ever needed, really.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of a thing that a lot of early DMs do, is just oh yeah, I want to give my party some really cool treasure, and then automatically go the money route, when then you run into this, which isn't necessarily a problem. It depends on, where you are and what you're doing. But your players just have all this gold and they can afford every legendary magic item, and now you're how do I compete with that monster-wise?
Yeah. And part of it, I guess, is about what you're making available in the world. So we'll talk about this later on when we get to different things to spend it on. But if, you don't have to have that magic item shop where they can just get whatever they want. My DM just kind of did shower us in gold, and then whatever we could buy. I mean, we got kind of creative with it. Those were weirdly commissioned mounts and accoutrement, if you will. Anyway, so what about in your games?
So in my first Dungeons & Dragons game, we were playing Lost Mines of Phandelver. We were kind of struggling to figure things out as a party, so story-wise. So we weren't really getting many rewards because we weren't accomplishing many milestones. So we didn't have that much money. But one of the things that our DM did was he had a traveling magic item shop with an NPC. He wasn't the shopkeeper, but he accompanied this caravan, and he was called the Lone Ranger because you could take out a loan for a magic item. Unfortunately, the interest rates were just too high, and we still couldn't afford anything. So, we didn't really fall into that trap of, having our debts beholden to this mysterious guy who could apparently, teleport our money away or something. I forget how it worked. It was a couple of years ago, but yeah. And he did wear a cowboy hat.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, though. The idea of an NPC in the world who can give your players money if you decide to go a more conservative route with this and then don't give out much at all, having characters, basically having other ways that they can get money that will have other consequences.
Get a job, you hippies.
Yeah. Trying to think quickly about some of the other games that I've run. So in the campaign I ran for you, as well as a few other friends, of course, I didn't give out much gold at all, but you guys still ended up, like by the end of it, it was like rewarding land and stuff.
It was the land and also the boons that you gave us.
Yes.
Or that we received from
LaRue. The Archfey.
The unicorn goddess.
Yeah, so there's basically thinking of other ways to reward your party is always a good way to go about it. Because gold is kind of an easy thing to just like throw in someplace, but it really, I don't know, there's like world building implications there of like, where did that gold come from? Whose actually is it? Like if it's in some dungeon somewhere, like who amassed it and why, and who did they take it from initially, or how did they earn it? Like those things are important for thinking about where the money really belongs, I guess, if your characters end up with it, which could lead to interesting story implications as well of like who might want it back.
Think Pirates of the Caribbean on this.
Oh, yeah.
Feel free to turn all your players into zombies if you have to.
That's a great tip. I really like that because...
That's why they call me Grace World Builder.
Yeah, that's why everybody calls you that now. But yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Pirates of the Caribbean, one, great movie, great plot, great characters, great D&D adventure, essentially. And yeah, cursing some gold is a great way to keep your players attached to it. They're going to be careful about how it's dispersed, right? Because they needed all of it.
Yeah,
right, in one place to.
But the thing was that they didn't realize at first that it was cursed.
Right. Okay, I feel like we're getting on a bit of a tangent here, but point is, there's great material there. Curse your gold. Rewatch Pirates of the Caribbean as soon as possible. Okay. Before we jump into our list, got any other cool stories about spending gold?
Yeah. So there was that thing when I was running. Princes of the Apocalypse for you and a couple other people. There's nowhere in that campaign to buy stuff with all the cash that you find in these dwarven ruins. So you guys wound up going all the way to Waterdeep.
Oh, yeah.
And then some horrible disasters occurred while you were there. Because basically, like, the cult activity was supposed to be ramping up around that time. But you guys just had all this cash, and we're like, we gotta spend it. So that's a tip. Don't feel like you have to spend all your gold.
Right. But there's gotta be something to do with it. Because I think part of it was, we had all this money. Well, I feel like a lot of it was in gems, too. I could be wrong about that. But point is, we had all this wealth. And didn't know what to do with it. And for me, I think it's a matter of feeling like I don't want to lose all this. Like if we get defeated down here in this, like we didn't know how big this dungeon was, whatever. So even if that just means like some kind of place, I mean, granted, this is going to be something we'll touch on, but buying maybe your own home or something where you can keep things locked up somewhere safe, or even just like having a secure like chest in a hidden location. Some place to hide your gold, basically, if not a bank, if that kind of thing exists in the world, is also really useful. Because then it won't necessarily force your players to look for ways to spend it. They could just hoard it up themselves somewhere.
Yeah, just dump it in a cave. That's what the dragons do.
Yeah. Oh, one more thing we can bring up before we get into our list is considering how much gold your characters start with. Because this is always something we kind of run into when starting a campaign is like, okay, are we just like using what's available in the background, or are we actually going to roll for it as it explains in the PHB, in the character customization section, I think, where depending on your class, you can start out with like over 100 gold pretty easily.
That's a weird thing because really, if you think about it, it should be based on your background because that's your job.
Right.
Unless you didn't have a job, like you were an outlander, in which case why would you even need gold? Why would you
I don't
have
know if
it?
they start with any, yeah.
I mean, the Outlander background doesn't give you any gold.
Yeah.
But then if you have an Outlander background, but you're like a fighter, then you have like 40 gold probably to start with. I don't
Right.
know off the top of my head, but fighters, I think, have one of the highest amounts.
Yeah. Yeah, so it definitely should be more skewed to the background and probably not the class. I guess unless maybe you're starting at a higher level. But starting at level 1, I don't think rolling for gold on that class table makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, like with magic items, this is assuming that your character has had a way to accrue this money.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely like, okay, if you're going to assume they have been an adventurer and been, I don't know. It totally just depends on their
if your
personal history.
Outlander, like, stumbled into some dwarven ruins, and
Right.
that's when they became an adventurer, then yeah, they could totally have some treasure in those dwarven ruins.
Yeah, as long as you can justify it, basically.
Yeah.
Like in the campaign that some of you folks are playing in on Patreon. We haven't really gotten deep into this yet of like how much gold exactly everyone has, but one of the characters is from a somewhat noble house of kobold engineers and tinkerers, so to speak. And so I'm just kind of assuming that we haven't put a number on it, that he comes from a pretty wealthy family. So I don't know how much gold this individual actually has, but he has a lot of resources and I guess like assets available to him. So
But are they liquid assets?
probably not. Actually, that was something I was thinking of that came up in the first session, is that outside of his workshop, where he has this kind of big yard where he does a lot of work, that it's kind of like a junkyard. But most of it is their treasure from other people's trash kind of thing.
One man's trash is another man's treasure, but one man's treasure is another man's trash.
It sure is. Okay. And
That's why they call me Grace World Builder.
if we say it enough times, something will happen. Anyway, are you ready to get into some gold spending possibilities?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's start with the least exciting of these that I came up with, which was just thinking of what are the things we have to spend money on in real life. So, food.
Rent.
Characters never have to buy food in D&D. Like, most of the time, somebody just has an Outlander background, and it's just like, okay, yeah, I just, like, find berries and hunt a deer for everybody every day during our adventure.
Yeah, but this is kind of where role-playing comes in. Because in real life, you would get tired of eating venison and berries and mushrooms every single day.
Oh, yeah, in Princess of the Apocalypse, one of the characters was a druid and had like tons and tons of good berries, and then like save them up. So even though they only lasted a day, it ended up being like we just had hundreds, I feel like, of leftover good raisins. I don't remember what we actually called them, but they were just like shriveled up good berries that didn't quite serve the purpose, but were still food. But yeah, and besides food, simple things like shelter. You mentioned rent, of course. Like if you're an adventurer, you're on the road a lot. At least then you're going to be spending money at inns off and on.
I mean, I've done the thing before where my character would just, like, camp in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
But if I did that in, like, an actual city, you'd get arrested.
Or something,
so
yeah.
if your characters are doing that, maybe as the TM, you just have the guards come up. But this isn't about arresting your players. This is about spending money.
Right. But speaking of ways to kind of tick your players off with this, taxes are another really important thing that are a major way that we don't get to keep all of our money in real life.
Yeah, but it's hard to get audited when you spend all your time underground or in the woods.
Yes. And so this is something that would definitely only really make sense if you're playing in a really urban campaign or something where...
Or even if they just own property somewhere.
Yes.
Then they have an address. And the IRS, the fantasy IRS, can send them letters.
Yeah. And I totally understand the arguments against this because obviously, like, who wants the IRS in their fantasy world?
Who wants that?
But
I don't want it.
yeah, but it's a matter of maintaining certain levels of realism so that you can have a government and an economy, I guess, in your world.
It's about the immersion.
Right.
Your world's just not immersive if you don't have to deal with learning how to do your taxes.
And I would say having a heavily taxed city or something, or a heavily taxed population, is a world building technique of its own, because you can make it a very kind of grimdark setting if like all the people are kind of oppressed in this way, where they work like so hard for so little.
No, it doesn't do any trickling down.
Exactly. Saving for retirement is something I have thought of here, where, of course, adventurers aren't going to be able to keep up that lifestyle forever. And a lot of them, I feel like, have this kind of live fast, die young
That's exactly
motivation.
what I was going to say.
Yeah, so it might not come into play. And maybe that's why, you end up with all these, like, 10th level innkeepers in your world, because they're just retired adventurers.
Yeah. Like, Name of the Wind.
Yeah. What's his name? Anyway.
Starts with a K.
Yeah. Corey. I don't know. That starts with a K. All right. Maybe last one from this section, so we can move on to more exciting stuff. Education or training in some regard.
Yeah, that's, I think, a thing in 3rd edition where you can basically pay for levels.
Maybe pay for skill points? Because that was the thing? Or skill ranks?
Remember.
I forget what it was called.
It's been so long since I read those books, and it's just so convoluted.
Yeah. It kind of exists in 5e still. I'm not...
It's only, like, as a downtime activity it exists. And it's for, like, proficiencies.
Right.
I think. Like, language proficiencies. You pay for a tutor to teach you a language.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not totally read up on that, so I'm not sure of the specifics, but spending gold to learn more skills, whether, it's a skill proficiency or like a musical instrument, a language, a tool set, any of those things. Because there are a lot of interesting tool sets, especially in, say, like Xanathar's Guide. It at least has a lot of interesting information about what to do with the different tool sets and what actually makes them up. In any case, so our next category can be the standard adventuring stuff. So, of course, you can buy weapons, you can buy nicer armor, you can buy different adventuring gear, kind of touches on our tool sets we just talked about. But also available, again, depending on your level of fantasy perhaps, is like a potion shop, scrolls, any kind of consumable magic items, I feel like are kind of left out in a lot of campaigns. You don't see them like showing up, I feel like, in a lot of the books, like available for purchase anyway.
Yeah, that's something I've been trying to focus on more is, well, you in the current game we're playing, Out of the Abyss, you're not really in a location where you can shop.
Yeah.
But it has occurred to me more and more that items that I have perceived as less useful are not at all less useful than the things that I like to give you. So yeah, definitely like potions, not even just healing potions, but like potions of fire breathing and potions of giant strength and
invisibility, water walking. I don't know.
All the potions.
You can make them up. I don't even know how many potions there really are in the DMG or whatever, but really any spell can just be made into a potion.
When I was playing Pathfinder, Warhammer or something, I had a potion that made my character fart fire. That was awesome.
Yeah. And to me, like in my setting that you guys played in, I don't know if it ever really came up, but there was in one of the cities like a potion shop. There's a shop full of different potions. And I just made them up based on different spells available. Like kind of trying to stay with what level like you guys were around, but
like scrolls, but in liquid form.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, the benefit of that is that for potions, you don't have to have any magical skill to be able to use them without a sort of mishap.
True. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. I never really considered that before.
And I think, I don't know, I mean, I kind of feel like potions can run a little bit cheaper than scrolls
Yeah.
Money-wise, because that's what the topic is money.
Right. And it makes some sense because I was thinking about this. It's kind of what I thought you were about to say. Scrolls can be recorded by like another arcane user.
Yes.
And then basically copied, but maybe only if they already know the spell. But the point is, if you got a wizard and it's a scroll from a wizard spell list, they can put that into their book, and then over time, and of course this is going to cost them a lot of gold, so spell components being another thing to spend your gold on, they can create more scrolls.
Yes. Wizards are just infinite scroll generating machines.
But not infinite, because you totally need a lot of gold to create those items.
It's all about the money.
Yeah. And even potions actually take a certain amount of gold to craft, but specifically in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I'm pretty sure it says that consumable items like these things take about half as much money as the standard price is kind of listed per magic rarity. Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of magic, another thing up here that I want to say came into play in my initial campaign hasn't really come up since because there are no rules for it in 5e as far as I know. Magically upgrading your existing items. Enchanting stuff.
Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to say magically upgrading your body.
Well, yeah.
Which, that's a thing in Radiance, which was the second RPG that I played. I didn't have to pay for the upgrade that I got because I wrote a short story for my DM to read about it. But I forget what my point was.
Well, yeah, so this kind of, I'm thinking a little bit about, like, Name of the Wind again here, where he studied, like, runecraft, and is able to, like, enchant stuff with that. Something I've considered, but haven't really had the chance to implement in my worlds yet, magical tattoos. So that's a kind of another way to enhance your character, literally, is like having these tattoos where you can get spell effects or some kind of, even a feat, basically, from these things. But there's a really popular supplement on DM's Guild that I've yet to check out that I think touches on this. But like one of the games that inspired my love for D&D has different like crystals and things that you can just combine with weapons. And then like once it's on there, I think you have to have it there. So then it's like, oh no, but now I found this more powerful sword, but my other one is magic.
That's a thing in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Where you get rune stones that if your sword is magical enough, you can put a rune stone in it, and then it does a certain thing. But then in order to either get that rune stone out or, I forget. But something has to be destroyed in the process if you want to switch it out.
Yeah. And just speaking of upgrades, silvering your weapons is always a good cost for gold. Speaking of The Witcher, I guess, as well.
Silvering, making that +1 a sweet +2.
Yeah.
Maybe even adding an extra charge to a wand.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these magical items, or non-magical items, are going to have ways to upgrade them. So I would say with this, it's a matter of kind of listening to what your players want, asking your players what they would be interested in. This is all homebrew, basically. It's coming into play, so you got to be a little careful with what you design.
Careful, but flexible.
Yeah. Basically, err on the side of make it cool, and then tell your players up front, hey, if this is too cool, we might have to take it down a little bit.
Yeah, in my homebrew mini-campaign, the Boglord's Vengeance, we had a character who would fight with gauntlets.
Yes.
And he got spikes put on his gauntlets to let him, or he wanted to, but it was going to take too long for, like, the amount of time that you had. But it was going to do, like, an extra 1d4 piercing damage with the bludgeoning damage. So it doesn't have to be magical items that you're upgrading.
Yeah.
Is what we're saying.
Right. And so maybe speaking of some non-magical things to spend your money on here, more luxury items is kind of how I've labeled them. So number 1, I'm thinking here, bribing. So that's a great way to get information from people aside from just like, oh, hey, innkeeper, I slide you a gold coin for that information. Like this could be real. This is going to be serious, like corruption going on.
Yeah, like some real white-collar stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking buttering up, rubbing elbows.
Oh, man.
We're talking espionage type
Yeah.
blackmail.
Full-on conspiracies.
Full-on conspiracies.
Yeah. And there's no paper trail with this stuff, right? It's all cash.
There's only the metal trail.
Right. Is that what a paper trail? Is that what paper trail really means? Is just like
No,
the money,
it's
or
not
it
what
means like records?
It means records.
Yeah, this is cash under the table, bribing left and right.
Yeah, here's a cool thing to spend your money on: extravagant parties.
Okay.
Where you rub your elbows against the nobles.
Yeah.
And that includes buying yourselves really cool outfits.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, these are things I wanted to bring up. So basically, like living the high life, right? So just fancy food, fancy shelter, whether that's like some awesome mansion that you have, or maybe just rented for a cool party or something. But like throwing events. That could be something that your notable, reputable adventurers want to do in the world. Having that fancy clothes, jewelry, maybe making gems that you found into jewelry, commissioning art pieces, just buying expensive art, whether or not it's custom, having books, which should be really valuable in a setting like this, really, any kind of medieval type setting. Going to a bathhouse, ooh, spa day. Yeah,
But
I guess this
maybe
is depending on setting.
bathhouse versus river.
Yeah, just a
When you
swale on the side of the
When you
road.
can go to the bathhouse, you've made it.
Yeah, probably.
And you can look down at the river, at all the people bathing in the cold water, and just flick some gold pieces.
Right. But so basically very simple luxuries things. Like, so you mentioned just like cold water. So literally having an establishment with running water would be like, oh my gosh, that is some luxury stuff to spend your money on. Basically people to clean your clothes, to cook for you, to drive you around on your horse and buggy or whatever you got, buying a boat. These are all things that, people still do in the real world with their unnecessary amounts of money.
Yeah, or buying a business. I feel like this is something that you were going to get to later. But something that buying a business entails is upkeep.
Yes.
So if your business makes a lot of money, that's cool. You don't really have to worry about upkeep because the upkeep comes from the income of the business. But if your business sucks, then the money for upkeep comes out of your own pocket.
Yeah.
So there's a way to spend money. Make a business that fails.
Yeah. I mean,
That's why they call me Grace World Builder.
Yep. Just start a personal brand on YouTube and then JK. Okay. But yeah, so that was kind of one of the latter things I totally wanted to touch on. Because, and also I don't know why I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but it's something we did in our first campaign as well. That did come up in that video, is we had a renovated barn, which we just called the barn. It's the sample pack. It's the sample pack available here on Patreon. The first monthly supplement was this tavern that we created, basically, and we just came up with like vague, numbers for like, this is what it costs to pay our bartender. This is what it costs to pay. There was like one server, buying the materials, actually like building it, making it nice. All of these things we kind of came up with prices for, about what it costs to establish it and then what it costs to keep it up monthly, and then came up with how we were going to roll basically to kind of randomly determine the success each month. And then it turns out in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's some tables for all this stuff.
Yeah.
So it really takes the work out for you. Off the top of my head, because I failed to write it down, I believe it was page like 127, 128. And it's something I kind of wish more players did. I guess you guys, I don't know, I guess it doesn't come up a lot. You really need to have a good amount of downtime for this sort of thing to make sense.
And most adventurers, unless this is a really like long-term party that you're with, don't really have the time to settle down and build a keep.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on, it's all about the DM too, because if you're just going to keep throwing conflict after conflict in their path, then they don't have time to establish themselves anywhere. But if you...
Or have time to spend money on anything else. Spend money on anything that takes time to brew or write or smith. So that's something to think about when you want your players to spend some money. Give them time to spend their money.
Because time is money. And so some final notes here, final things to build that I came up with here was like then creating your own school, creating your own shrines maybe to a deity that your character worships, creating, because every adventurer, right, is like an orphan. Create an orphanage. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's nice.
If you're in a city, make some kind of a homeless shelter. These are all cool things that need to be funded and might not be by the government, depending on what kind of setting you're in. So having adventurers, wealthy adventurers, philanthropists, kind of foot the bill makes sense.
This is like extremely high tier, almost like post-game levels of wealth and downtime.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Because that's what your character did.
Oh yeah, we made a town, right? Are you
Well, you built up
Fortune?
a town, but Fortune
she created the Adventurers Guild.
Yeah.
So say you're like a monk or a bard, and you spend all this time adventuring, and now you want to build your own music school or monastery.
Yeah.
Well, that, as a player, I would say, gives you the ability to build your own subclass based on the values of your character. So that later in the world, your DM can be like, hey, your old character created this type of monk style. Your new character can go to this school and learn this style and have this new subclass.
Yeah. To some degree. Money is power, like in real and fantasy worlds. Like it is a means to an end. So they're able to have really world-changing possibilities, I guess, depending on what they decide to use that money on. It's cool to play in that same timeline and just kind of either jump forward or jump back and see how previous characters have changed things for better or for worse with whatever they amassed along the way. But all in all, there are a lot of things to spend your money on. I will be making a video on this that kind of sums up a lot of these different topics, but I've enjoyed this chat. I hope you guys have liked Podcast of Pending Name, Episode 1, official.
You should just call it that forever. Podcast of Pending Name.
Very important podcast. VIP.
Bob World Builders. Very important podcast.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. So I want to know, though, please leave a comment. What have you creatively spent your gold on, or your players have creatively spent their gold on? Have you experienced this problem at all? Maybe you just don't give your characters much gold at all to completely avoid this fiasco.
Have you ever crashed the entire economy of a setting by not having anything to spend your gold on?
Yeah. Or, by characters killing that dragon and then, oh my gosh, there's millions of gold pieces. What happens now? Let me know. Thanks for listening. Keep building.
Keep building.